An elderly black man, Harold Evans, quietly steps into a suburban convenience store, but a racist cop, Officer Dwayne Beckett, doesn't like the sight of him. What starts with a cruel assumption escalates into an illegal search. A single sentence from Harold shifts the entire energy in the room. "We got eyes on an old black male, probably dealing with something. Let's shake him down." The words came sharp through Officer Dwayne Beckett's radio, but they weren't just relayed, they were loaded. The kind of tone that tasted of authority, contempt, and confidence in getting away with it. The convenience store was barely lit, the ceiling fans turning slow and tired in the lazy summer heat of suburban Georgia, the quiet hum of fluorescent lights flickered against linoleum tiles scuffed with time. A few customers stood in line at the register, some browsing chips and soda. And then there was Harold Evans. He stood in the corner aisle, adjusting the glasses on his nose while reading the back of a cereal box. Dressed in a grey cardigan, loose, slacks and polished loafers, the kind of man who looked like he owned more books than anyone else in the store. But for Beckett, who had just pulled up in his cruiser outside, none of that mattered. Beckett walked in, eyes locked. His posture screamed enforcer, wide stance, puffed chest, hand resting on his belt like it was holstered pride. Everyone felt it. A subtle shift. The cashier glanced up. The woman near the soda fridge froze with a bottle half raised. Beckett didn't bother with courtesy. "You, sir, step away from the aisle." Harold turned slowly, raising an eyebrow. "Something wrong, officer?" "You fit a description." "Of what?" Beckett grinned. "Suspicious activity. Let's not waste time. Empty your pockets." Harold blinked, not in fear, in disbelief. But he stayed still, calm. He set the cereal box down, deliberate and gentle. "I'm 71, Harold said, his voice smooth as aged oak. What kind of suspicious activity would that involve? Beckett was already moving in. "You've got the right look, the right age, maybe the wrong neighborhood. Let's go." The store had gone silent. No one moved. A young black teenager nearby clutched his backpack tighter. Beckett's hands were on Harold now, patting him down aggressively, violating personal space without consent. Then, with a magician's flair, Beckett pulled something from his own jacket pocket, a small baggie with white powder, and let it fall to the floor between Harold's shoes. "Bingo," Beckett sneered. "Well, look what we have here." Gasps. The woman at the counter dropped her drink. Harold didn't move, didn't blink. He looked Beckett dead in the eye and said, "I suggest you pick that up, officer. You'll want to dust it for your fingerprints. Later." Silence. Beckett froze for just a second, enough for the tension to shift. "And why would I do that?" he asked, half chuckling. "Because I haven't touched it. And because I've seen your kind of justice before." Harold's voice was now cutting through the room like a cold wind. "But you didn't recognize me, did you?" Beckett frowned. "No," Harold continued. "You only saw an old black man in the wrong store." Beckett scoffed. "You gonna preach now?" Harold gave a small, tired smile, then leaned in. "You should Google me." That line didn't just hang in the air. It cracked the energy in half. A few customers were already reaching for their phones. Someone hit a record. Beckett stepped back, confused now, shaky. Then the door chimed. Another officer walked in. A woman. She froze when she saw Harold. Her voice trembled. "Sir, Mr. Evans, what happened?" Beckett turned. "You know this guy?" The woman stared at Beckett like he had just insulted the president. "That's retired federal Judge Harold Evans, former chief of the Southern Justice Review Panel." Beckett's smirk evaporated. Harold's voice came again, calm as before. "You planted evidence, Officer Beckett, in front of witnesses and cameras, on a man who's been putting officers like you behind bars for the last 20 years. Then came the cliffhanger, soft but sharp, and the part you'll regret the most is tomorrow morning in court, when I testify under oath." Beckett sat in his patrol car, fingers drumming against the steering wheel. jaw clenched tight. He had returned to the station 2 hours ago, but the weight of what had happened in that convenience store was heavier than the Kevlar vest he wore. It was supposed to be a routine intimidation play, a quick flex of power, nothing more. He had done it before, not the planting part, but the aggression, the assumptions, the quiet humiliation. The system let him. But this time, he hadn't seen it coming. That name, Harold Evans, a name that, until now, meant nothing to him. But apparently, it meant everything to the rest of the department. He remembered the look on Officer Ramirez's face when she walked in. The horror, the immediate recognition. "She's lying," Beckett muttered under his breath, but he wasn't sure anymore. He leaned forward, turned the radio down, and pulled out his phone. No messages, no warnings. Just the quiet dread of the unknown. He opened his browser and typed Harold Evans, Judge, Georgia. The page loaded slowly. His eyes scanned the search results. Dozens of articles, court cases, interviews, awards. Harold Evans was not just a judge. He was a national figure in legal reform. He'd led investigations into wrongful convictions, exposed corrupt precincts, and helped draft bills aimed at police accountability. Beckett's mouth went dry, and then he saw it, a photo of Harold standing next to the governor. Another one at a national conference with federal attorneys, smiling, shaking hands, powerful. The same man Beckett had shoved against a shelf, frisked without cause, and accused of dealing drugs in front of an entire store. His phone buzzed. "Message from Ramirez. You need to come in. Chief's looking for you. Video's out." Beckett's heart dropped. Inside the station, it felt like something was rotting in the air, a tension so thick it stifled every movement. Conversations hushed when Beckett walked in. A few officers looked away. One sergeant just shook his head. He walked straight to the chief's office. The door was already open. Chief Reynolds, a grey-haired man with deep lines carved into his face, didn't ask him to sit. "You want to tell me what the hell that was?" the chief growled, tossing a printed screenshot onto the desk. It was from the video, a freeze frame. Beckett mid-search, his hand on Harold's shoulder. Harold, looking calm, regal, everyone else watching. I thought he matched the description. "Don't play me, Dwayne." The chief's voice was sharp. "We both know there was no description, no call. You went in there on your own. No dispatch, no backup." "I didn't plant anything." "You didn't? Because the footage looks like you dropped something between his feet right before you said bingo. Want to explain that?" Look, it wasn't like that. It's all twisted." "The only thing twisted is that you picked the one man in this state who has every judge, DA, and federal office on speed dial." Beckett's pulse thundered. The chief leaned forward. "There's an internal inquiry starting now. You'll be put on desk duty until further notice, and that's me being generous." Beckett clenched his fists. "He's playing this up. That man set me up." "No," the chief snapped. "You set yourself up." Meanwhile, Harold sat in his home, a small 2-story red brick house shaded by a willow tree. He was in his study, surrounded by old leather-bound books and newspaper clippings pinned on a corkboard. A thick envelope lay in front of him, a subpoena request already drafted. His granddaughter, Layla, sat on the couch behind him, scrolling through social media. "Grandpa," she said quietly, "it's everywhere." He turned. The video, Twitter, TikTok, even the news sites. "They're calling it a clear abuse of power." Harold nodded. "It was bound to happen. I've been trying to shine light into these corners for decades. Now it happened to me. People believe it because they saw it." Layla looked worried. "Are you okay?" He smiled gently. "I've been called names before, Layla. I've been pushed off sidewalks, denied service, followed in stores. But this time, they messed up. They did it in front of the world." He walked to his bookshelf and pulled out a case file. "He's just another name now, another chapter." Layla watched as her grandfather placed the new file beside dozens of others, each labeled with names, badge numbers, dates, all of them stories of injustice, but this time it was personal. By the next day, the department was in full lockdown mode. Media vans parked outside, reporters camped out with microphones and long-lens cameras. Protesters began gathering by. Noon, holding signs that read, "Justice for Harold." "Cops aren't above the law." "We stand with the judge," inside. Beckett was unraveling. He slammed his locker door shut and turned to Ramirez. "You could have had my back." Ramirez frowned. "I saw what you did. Everyone did. It's not what it looked like." Then what was it? He had no answer. That night, Harold stood in front of a mirror, adjusting his tie, a quiet resolve in his posture. He wasn't just going to testify, he was going to teach them a lesson, one they wouldn't forget. As he prepared to leave for the courthouse the next morning, Layla came over, holding up her phone. "Grandpa, someone else posted something." She turned the screen. A new video. Security cam footage from outside the store. It showed Beckett pulling the plastic baggie out from his cruiser door pocket before walking in. Harold's eyes narrowed. His voice was low. "It's over for him." Layla nodded. "It's just getting started for you." He smiled. "Yes, it is." The steps of the courthouse echoed with chants. It wasn't the usual Tuesday crowd. No quiet civil hearings or parking disputes. This time there were hundreds of people. Some held up signs. This time there were hundreds of people. Some held up signs. Others wore shirts with Harold's face printed beneath bold letters. "Know his name." News helicopters hovered above like vultures waiting to feast. Layla stood beside Harold on the top step, her hand clutching his sleeve. His presence, despite the chaos around them, was still, like an unmoving pillar in the center of a hurricane. Camera flashes lit up his features as reporters screamed over one another. "Judge Evans, do you think this department should be defunded?" "Sir, are you filing a lawsuit?" "What's your response to Officer Beckett's statement?" Harold didn't flinch, didn't answer. Instead, he walked past them all, steady, slow, precise. The building seemed to absorb his calm as he entered, as if even the walls recognized who he was. Inside, Officer Beckett sat in a windowless room, a blank wall, a metal table and 2 chairs. Across from him sat Internal Affairs investigator Carla Mendez, flanked by a note-taker. He was sweating, not just from heat, but from exposure. His uniform clung tighter now. The air conditioning buzzed, but it didn't help. "Start from the beginning," Mendez said, voice like steel wrapped in velvet. "I approached a suspicious individual. Judge Harold Evans? I didn't know who he was at the time." She raised an eyebrow. "Did you see what you dropped between his feet?" "I didn't drop anything. That was caught on 3 cameras." Silence. "We also have security footage of you removing a small bag from your cruiser before entering the store." Beckett's mouth opened, then closed. "You said he matched a description. No such report was made. Dispatch logs confirm." He rubbed his face. "This is being blown out of proportion." She leaned in. "You planted drugs on a federal judge. In broad daylight, proportion has left the building." In the courthouse hallway, Layla helped Harold settle onto a wooden bench. His hands, slightly wrinkled and lined with age, clutched a leather-bound folder containing written statements and legal articles he himself had authored years ago. One by one, familiar faces began arriving. There was District Attorney Maya Rhodes, once a student in Harold's judicial mentorship program. Behind her was Reverend Thomas Green, a civil rights leader who marched alongside Harold in his younger days. And then a shockwave. U.S. Attorney Marcus Deal entered. No press had known, no announcement had been made. But his sudden appearance brought murmurs even among seasoned courthouse staff. He walked straight to Harold. "Sir," he said, shaking his hand with reverence. "We've been waiting for a case like this. They finally picked the wrong one." Harold looked him in the eye. "They've picked the wrong ones for years. The only difference is this time the camera didn't blink." Downstairs, Beckett left the IA room under a cloud of whispers. His badge was still clipped to his chest, but it hung heavy now, not like honor, more like weight. He pushed through the exit door and was hit by chants from protesters gathered near the backlot. "No justice, no peace. Shame on Beckett. Evans for justice." Someone threw a paper cup, not violent, but public. Beckett ducked into his car, fists trembling against the steering wheel. His phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. "We have footage from your last 3 stops. Might want to call a lawyer." His heart stopped for a moment. What? He opened the link in the text. Video clips. Grainy dashcam extractions. One showed a black teenager being searched aggressively while crying. Another, an older woman being pulled from her car and shouted at. He swallowed. Hard. The footage was dated, stamped, logged. Everything was unraveling. Back upstairs, the hearing room was full. Spectators packed into pew-style seating like a Sunday sermon. Every bench was filled. Security stood against every corner, watching but not interrupting. The presiding judge, Honor Denise Lockhart, was reviewing her notes as attorneys began filing. And Harold sat quietly, not at the witness stand yet, but he didn't need a spotlight to command the room. When she looked up and saw him, Judge Lockhart took a beat. Just 1 second of silence before continuing. The bailiff read the charges. Preliminary review of misconduct by Officer Dwayne Beckett involving falsification of evidence, racial profiling, and obstruction of justice. Gasps swept through the gallery, not because of the charges, but because someone in power had actually read them aloud. Then the real moment came. Judge Lockhart leaned forward. "Mr. Evans, you've filed an official declaration with supporting evidence. Will you be testifying today?" Harold stood. "I will, Your Honor." Every eye turned to him. The air seemed to shift. Sharp, quiet, focused. He took the stand, his voice carried without a mic. "I've spent over 4 decades in service to the law. I've ruled on thousands of cases, but none until now has been quite so personal." He looked at Beckett, who sat at the defendant's table with a tight-lipped attorney beside him. "When Officer Beckett approached me, he didn't see a citizen. He didn't see a judge. He saw a target, a man whose age and skin color fit his assumption of guilt." He paused. "He planted evidence. I saw it. Others saw it, and more importantly, the world saw it." Layla watched from the gallery, tears in her eyes. Some may ask why this moment matters so much, why this incident has triggered national attention. Harold scanned the courtroom. "Because this wasn't about me. This was about how easily injustice can be done when no one's watching, and how much it fears the light." He leaned forward, slow and deliberate. "And to those who watched and chose to speak, thank you. You are the reason this moment is no longer silent." Outside, the protest doubled in size. Students, retired lawyers, clergy, veterans. They came not just for Harold, but for what he represented. A quiet rebellion wrapped in dignity. A reminder that justice was not just a system, but a fight. Social media exploded. Justice for Harold trended globally. Talk show hosts replayed his quote, "He didn't see a citizen. He saw a target." And the question began to echo louder. How many others had Beckett done this to? In the nearby county jail, a public defender named Joyce Mendoza reviewed open cases that listed Beckett as the arresting officer. She flagged 6, then 12, then 24. Each one involved black or Hispanic men. Each one had missing footage, or shaky testimony, or no body cam records. She picked up her phone and called the clerk's office. "We need to reopen all of them." Back in the courtroom, Harold stepped down from the stand. He passed Beckett on the way back to his seat. The officer didn't raise his head, and Harold didn't say a word, but something unspoken passed between them. Not pity, not even anger, just certainty. Joyce Mendoza hadn't slept. The file sat in front of her, nearly 3 feet high, a wall of paper filled with the echoes of injustice. Arrest records, case summaries, witness statements, all with the same signature at the bottom, Officer D. Beckett. She sipped cold coffee, eyes burning from the fluorescent light in her office, and marked another file with red ink. Inconsistent. Bodycam logs, suspicious search, suppressed footage. She'd seen dirty cops before, corrupt precincts, but this one wasn't sloppy. Beckett had been careful, precise. Most of his reports were textbook clean, too clean. And the faces in the mugshots. Black, brown, poor, forgotten, but not anymore. She picked up her phone and called the State Review Board. I need an emergency audit on Officer Beckett's last 5 years. I have evidence of systemic abuse of power and falsified reports. Issue. Voice on the other end paused. This tied to the Evans case? Joyce replied, her voice steady. It's tied to everything. Meanwhile, Beckett sat alone in his apartment. The curtains drawn, the lights off. His world had shrunk to a phone that wouldn't stop buzzing, a TV replaying Harold's courtroom testimony, and a mind unraveling at the seams. He didn't see a citizen. He saw a target. That line looped in his head like a curse. He opened his messages. His union rep had texted twice, distant, diplomatic messages about options and media response. But his lawyer's message hit harder. 3 civil suits filed, more coming. You need to prepare for depositions. He slammed the phone down. His hands trembled as he reached for a bottle of whiskey. He hadn't drunk in years, but now everything was cracking open. At the courthouse, Harold returned for a follow-up statement. This time, no cameras, no crowd. Just the quiet hum of legal machinery resetting itself. He met briefly with the assistant U.S. attorney and passed over a sealed file. This is everything I've tracked about Officer Beckett over the past 2 decades. Informants, community complaints, even letters from ex-officers. The prosecutor blinked. You had this, Harold nodded. Some names were afraid to come forward. But now, the door's open. The prosecutor flipped through the pages, face darkening. These are enough to build a federal patent case. Then build it, Harold said. Not just for me, for all of them. Elsewhere in the city, a local podcast host named Deshaun Trent was broadcasting live. His voice cut through headphones across neighborhoods. Y'all remember the name Harold Evans, the man they tried to frame? Well, turns out this cop's been running a quiet war on our people for years, but this time we got proof. This time we got receipts. He pulled up a chart. Here's 47 arrests tied to Officer Beckett in the last 6 years. Want to guess how many of those got dismissed after the first hearing? 33. And guess what? All 33 were black men, most of them under 25. The comment section exploded. They've been doing this. Where's the justice? Time to reopen everything, Deshaun leaned forward. It ain't just about one cop. It's about a system that lets one man become a machine. But now the machine is breaking. By Thursday, 6 defense attorneys had filed formal requests to reopen Beckett-linked cases. One by one, names were being pulled from dusty archives and back into daylight. Malik Johnson, arrested for resisting despite video showing he never moved. Jerome Bell, charged with intent to distribute after a routine traffic stop. No drugs ever tested. Charges dropped quietly. Tyrone Morris, a teenager whose future was derailed after a planted pocket knife. They weren't statistics anymore. They were witnesses. Harold sat at home that evening, staring at a black and white photo on his mantel. It was from 1968, a younger version of himself, standing with a protest sign that read, "Dignity is a right." Layla walked in, holding a letter. "Grandpa, this just came in, from the mayor." He opened it, a formal apology. An offer to host a public reconciliation panel, an invitation to speak. Harold sighed. They're afraid. Layla looked confused. Of what? That the people might realize power only works when we let it. At the same time, Beckett's former partner, Officer Jalen Price, received an unexpected visit. A pair of federal agents stood on his porch. "Sir," one of them said, "we'd like to ask you some questions about Officer Beckett." Privately. Price hesitated. He'd spent years covering Beckett's back, staying silent, letting things slide, but he wasn't sure he could anymore. He stepped aside and opened the door. "Come in." Inside the federal courthouse, a sealed indictment was being prepared. The charges included civil rights violations, evidence tampering, unlawful search and seizure, racial profiling, and obstruction of justice. The name on the top of the file? Dwayne Beckett. The prosecutor signed the papers and slid them across the table. "Let's bring it down." By morning, the headlines were everywhere. "Former officer under federal investigation for systemic abuse. Harold Evans case triggers. Statewide review of police misconduct. Justice is coming, and its name is accountability." In the community, the momentum was real. A town hall meeting turned into a citywide movement. New laws were proposed. Surveillance rules rewritten. Officers placed on administrative review. Bodycam policies restructured, but amid the noise, Harold remained quiet, focused. He knew how systems worked, how they rebranded without changing, how they apologized without repair. This wasn't over. Not yet. Beckett sat in his kitchen, blinds drawn, packing a bag. He wasn't sure where he'd go, maybe out of state, maybe off the grid, but before he could finish, there was a knock on the door. He opened it slowly. 2 federal marshals. "Mr. Beckett," one said, "we have a warrant for your arrest. You need to come with us." He didn't fight, didn't scream. He just nodded, handcuffed silently, and walked out, past neighbors peeking through curtains, past the echo of sirens. He was no longer the enforcer. He was the accused. Back at Harold's home, Layla hugged him tightly as news broke on live television. The anchor's voice cracked with gravity. This morning, former officer Dwayne Beckett was arrested by federal authorities following a sweeping investigation triggered by Judge Harold Evans' viral courtroom testimony. Harold looked out the window, not proud, not vengeful, just ready. "So we need to draft a statement now." Mayor Glenn Thompson stood by the window of his corner office, watching protesters gather across City Hall Plaza. His aide, a young man in a wrinkled suit, stood anxiously behind him holding a trembling tablet. "They've already started painting. Murals, sir. Evans is being treated like a civil rights icon. We have to respond." The mayor turned, eyes weary. "This isn't just a PR nightmare, it's a damn earthquake." At the courthouse, Judge Lockhart convened an emergency meeting with senior justices and the State Bar Council. The topic? How to handle the growing number of appeals tied to Officer Beckett's past. The backlog's about to explode. 1. Judge said, "Every defense attorney in the city is lining up with motions. If we don't act fast, this whole institution will look complicit." Lockhart didn't flinch, then let it look. Because it was. Silence followed. "I'll authorize the review panel immediately," she continued, "and we bring Harold Evans in to lead it." At home, Harold received the call just after breakfast. He was stirring honey into his tea, Layla flipping through. Local news stations. Each one had his face, his quotes, his presence. She turned down the volume as he answered. "This is Judge Evans." "Sir, this is Judge Lockhart. We need you to chair the independent review committee for all Beckett-related cases." Harold didn't hesitate. "I accept." The review process began within 48 hours. A long wooden table was set up inside the courthouse's oldest wing, a room lined with portraits of dead judges and heavy, leather-bound law books. But this time, the voices inside were different. formerly incarcerated men, parents, public defenders, journalists, social workers, all seated, all ready to speak, and at the center, Harold. No robe, no gavel, just a pen, a notepad, and a quiet resolve. The first speaker was Jerome Bell, a father of two, wrongfully accused by Beckett 6 years ago. I lost my job, my home. My kids lived with my sister while I fought a charge that never made it past. Arraignment, but I still got fired, I still got labeled. His voice cracked. I was innocent, and no one believed me until now. Harold nodded gently. We believe you now. At the same time, Beckett sat in a federal holding cell, isolated, stripped of his badge, no visitors allowed. A federal agent entered the room holding a thick binder. We've opened 54 cases linked to your arrests. Of those, 39 were dismissed due to lack of evidence. 4 involved missing body cam footage. 12 are under active civil litigation. Want to explain why so many of your cases are falling apart? Beckett leaned back against the wall, hollow-eyed. I was doing my job. No, you were doing something, but it wasn't justice. Meanwhile, across the city, a former police cadet named Rachel Torres released a video on her social media account. She had trained under Beckett during her probationary period. He told us to target the ones that looked like trouble. And when I asked what that meant, he laughed and said, "You'll know it when you see it." The video went viral within hours. Police unions tried to spin it, but the momentum was already unstoppable. Mayor Thompson was cornered in a press briefing. Mayor, do you take responsibility for Beckett being protected all these years? Mayor, did you know complaints were filed and buried? Will you be resigning? He cleared his throat. The city is launching a full review into not just Officer Beckett, but all disciplinary practices in the department. We've invited Judge Evans to lead oversight alongside community organizations. Another reporter cut in. Is it too little, too late? Thompson didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence said enough. In her high school classroom, Layla watched her classmates discuss her grandfather in real time. That man's a legend, one said. He turned a courtroom into a revolution. Layla smiled, quietly proud, but she also saw the pain behind some faces, the kids whose parents had also been through wrongful arrests. The kids who never had a Harold to speak for them. That night, she asked Harold something that had been pressing on her heart. Grandpa, what about the ones who didn't make it to court? He looked at her, eyes heavy. They're why I can't. Stop! Elsewhere, media outlets began chronicling each reopened case like chapters of a novel. Case 13, Tyrone Morris, 17, arrested outside a bodega, no weapon found, spent 11 months in juvenile. Case 26, Loretta Daniels, verbally assaulted, then arrested after demanding a supervisor. Charges dropped, PTSD diagnosis followed. Case 34, Elijah Boone, body slammed by Beckett after a jaywalking stop, permanent spinal damage. Case never reached trial. Their stories became fuel. A documentary crew began production. Talk show hosts offered Harold guest spots. He declined all of them. This isn't about celebrity, he told them. This is about consequence. In the church where Harold had been baptized 60 years earlier, a memorial service was held, not for a death, but for the silence that had died. Pastor Green stood at the pulpit, voice ringing through stained glass windows. They tried to bury truth, but they forgot one thing. He gestured to the pews. Truth grows roots, and now it's tearing the foundation apart. That week, the state legislature proposed the Harold Evans Police Accountability Act, including mandatory third-party oversight for all misconduct cases, body cam footage archiving, and harsher penalties for evidence tampering. The bill passed its first vote with overwhelming support. But Harold didn't celebrate. He read the fine print, and when he saw loopholes, he circled them. "This law's a start," he said to the bill sponsor. "But if it's not airtight, they'll slip right through." At sunset, Harold walked alone past the mural of his own face that had appeared on the side of a downtown library. He paused to take it in, not with vanity, but reflection. Young girl nearby pointed. "Is that him, Mama?" Her mother nodded. "That's the man who made the bad cop go away." Harold turned slightly and gave a small smile. The girl waved. He waved back, but he knew the fight wasn't over. It was only changing shape. Beckett sat in the interrogation room for the fourth time that week. He hadn't shaved. His uniform was gone. He wore an orange jumpsuit that clashed violently with the artificial white of the walls around him. His wrists sat chained to the table, loose enough for movement, tight enough to remind him of his place. The federal agent across the table, Agent Layton, opened a thick folder. The pages inside fluttered slightly, like ghosts trying to escape. "We're going to go through each incident one by one." Beckett didn't respond. "You're being presented with a choice," Layton continued. "Cooperate, and you might see sunlight before you turn 60. Stay silent and we'll bury you with every file you signed." Still nothing. Layton leaned in. "You thought the badge protected you, but the badge was never yours. It belonged to the people, and they're taking it back." Across town, the review panel reconvened. Harold sat at the head of the table, glasses perched low on his nose, a highlighter in hand. Around him sat public defenders, investigative journalists, professors, and civil rights advocates. In the center was a projector, screen displaying their current docket, current motions for reopening, 87. Closed without hearing, 41. Pending immediate release, 6. They were about to vote on one of the most contested files, a man named Terrence Miller, serving the 10th year of a 15-year sentence. He'd been convicted with a single piece of evidence, a bag of pills found in his coat pocket. The arresting officer, Dwayne Beckett. The body cam footage from that day had conveniently glitched halfway through. Harold looked up. "We're not deciding guilt or innocence here," he reminded the room. "We're deciding if the process was fair, and if Beckett touched it. It probably wasn't." One of the panelists, a former district judge, sighed. "He's the tip of a knife we've been trying to ignore." Another said, "If we do this, we set a precedent." "Then let it be set," Harold replied, voice clear. "Justice doesn't care about comfort." The vote was unanimous. Case reopened. Notification sent. Family informed. Somewhere in a prison cell, Terrence Miller would be getting the first, a bit of hope he'd seen in a decade. Back in holding, Beckett was brought a stack of letters. They weren't fan mail. Each was from a former arrestee, some handwritten, others typed, mocking, furious, or heartbreakingly raw. "You made me think I deserved what you did to me. I hope you remember every face you lied about. I still wake up hearing your voice." He threw them across the room, but they didn't stop coming. At a local precinct, murmurs of resentment began to build. Officers watched the news in break rooms with narrowed eyes. Some called Harold a hero. Others whispered the opposite. "He's turning the city against us. They'll hang us all for one man's mistake." He wasn't the only one. "Just the one who got caught," one officer muttered too loudly. "Maybe they should start profiling judges next." The room fell silent. Another officer stood up. "That's exactly the problem." The mayor's office hosted a private luncheon with city officials, union leaders, and prominent activists, Harold included. The event was supposed to be a show of unity. It felt more like a standoff with wine glasses. The union rep, a stern man with a politician's smile, leaned toward Harold. "You've stirred up a storm, Judge Evans." Harold looked at him without blinking. "I didn't stir it. I just stopped pretending it wasn't already here." The rep nodded slowly. "Just be careful. The law bends, but it doesn't like being bent too fast." Harold smiled faintly. "Then it should have bent a long time ago." Later that evening, Layla watched her grandfather fall asleep in his reading chair. She took the notepad from his lap and saw what he'd written. "A badge is only heavy when it hides guilt. A courtroom can't fix a heart. But truth breaks." "Locks." She closed the pad gently. Meanwhile, Beckett's lawyer walked into the interrogation room and dropped 2 manila folders on the table. New charges. Beckett didn't ask. Wrongful imprisonment. Fabricated evidence. One of them's a minor. You understand what that means for sentencing? Beckett looked up for the first time, broken in the eyes. I never hated them, he said quietly. I just knew no one would question me if I did. The lawyer stared at him. That's not a defense, that's a confession. Across the city, people were marching again, not for justice already served, but for justice delayed. Reopen the files. Free the innocent. Evans for oversight. But Harold didn't want a political seat. He wanted silence, structure, consequence. He drafted another motion that night, this time a statewide recommendation to audit all active officers. With 3 or more complaints in the past 5 years, he knew it wouldn't be welcomed, but that wasn't the point. Beckett was finally presented with a plea deal. 12 years, no parole, if he testified in full, detailing every arrest, every time he falsified a report, every officer who looked the other way. He stared at the paper for a long time, then asked a single question. If I talk, do I have to see him again? The agent nodded. He'll be there. You planted evidence on a federal judge. You don't get to hide from that. Beckett swallowed and picked up the pen. Harold was notified of the deal while sipping morning tea. Layla looked up at him. So, he's talking? Yes. Do you think he's sorry? Harold didn't answer right away. I think he's scared, he finally said. And sometimes fear tells the truth louder than guilt ever could. As night fell, Harold returned to the panel room to find a letter waiting for him on the desk. It wasn't from Beckett, it was from a mother. Her son had been arrested and deported after an encounter with Beckett. She had tracked Harold down, not asking for rescue, just to be heard. Her words ended with a line that stayed with him long into the night. Even when justice sleeps, truth walks, and it walked into court the day you did. The review panel was quiet that morning. Not tense, just quiet. The kind of quiet that comes when a room full of people finally admits the storm isn't coming. It's already here. Harold adjusted his seat, flipping through a fresh stack of files. But these weren't about Beckett. These were about the others, people who signed off on his reports, people who dismissed complaints, people who filed no findings again and again, even when footage was missing and stories didn't line up. Harold looked at the screen behind him. Names began to appear. Captain R. Bellamy, 14 internal memos dismissed without escalation, Sergeant Dana Ross, 11 complaints redirected without investigation, ADA Paul Linwood, 7 felony charges pursued on Beckett-only evidence. The room stayed. Still, we can't just clean up after Beckett, Harold said. We have to clean up everything that let him happen. At the police headquarters downtown, Captain Bellamy stared at the TV in his office. His own name, broadcasted, highlighted, undeniable. He locked the door, pulled open his drawer, and stared at the decades of service awards, medals, commendations. None of it mattered now. He remembered the first time Beckett was brought into his precinct, cocky, overconfident, aggressive. Bellamy had known something was off. He even flagged a report once, but then someone higher up told him to let the numbers talk, and the numbers always looked good. Beckett brought in arrests, closed cases, gave the illusion of efficiency. Bellamy turned the TV off and sat in the dark. Maybe he hadn't planted evidence. Maybe he hadn't drawn his weapon on a teenager or lied in court, but he'd let it slide again and again. At the district attorney's office, Paul Linwood stood in front of his staff. He'd been called out publicly during a podcast episode the night before. Paul Linwood. That man rubber-stamped every Beckett file like it was scripture, the host had said. You want to fix this mess? Start in his inbox. Now, his inbox had over 1,000 unread emails. Most were angry, some were damning. His paralegals avoided eye contact, his colleagues whispered in corridors, so he walked out, right into the main floor. and said, "I'm taking a leave of absence, effective immediately." Nobody clapped. Nobody said a word. They just let him go. Meanwhile, Beckett sat in a federal interview room with a list of names in front of him. He scratched a pen across the page, slowly. "That one knew," he muttered. "He watched me plant something once, laughed, said, 'Make sure it lands where the camera can't see.'" He tapped another. "She told me, off the record, to stop targeting the young ones." But that's all she did. No paperwork, no report. Name after name. His guilt was no longer just his. It was spreading like fire. Harold sat with Layla that night, his living room quiet except for the soft tick of a grandfather clock. "They're scared now," Layla said. "They should be," Harold replied. "They built a wall around a rotten foundation, and now they're wondering why it's collapsing." "But do you think they'll change?" Harold didn't answer at first. "I don't know, but I do know this. Silence can't be safe anymore." On the ground level, ripple effects began. A young officer named Daniel Mendez, who had worked under Beckett for 2 years, released a personal statement on video. "I was new, green. I saw what he did, and I stayed quiet because I thought that's what kept you alive in this job." His hands trembled as he held the paper. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm offering testimony." His video caught fire. Others followed. An anonymous former prosecutor, a female officer who once walked away from a planted bag, a former dispatcher who remembered a night where a complaint was redirected before it could even reach IA. Each voice added pressure. Each story closed another escape route for the complicit. Harold's review panel expanded to include recommendations on complicity accountability. The proposals included retroactive reviews of supervisory silence, legal liability for ignored complaints, mandatory disciplinary hearings for enabling misconduct, community oversight on complaint follow-through. The pushback was immediate. Union reps called it a witch hunt. City officials called it unsustainable. A few news anchors called it justice gone too far. But Harold called it what it was, the missing half of the story. During a town hall broadcast, a woman in her 60s stood up and spoke into the mic. "My nephew was arrested by Beckett. They threw the case out, but he couldn't get a job after. He never got a second chance." She turned to the panel. "I want to know who else knew. I want names." The crowd clapped, stomped, shouted, "Name them! Call them out! Silence is guilt." The tide had turned, no longer just Beckett's reckoning. It was everyone's. At a small church the next morning, Harold gave an impromptu address. He stood at the pulpit. No cameras, just community. "You want to know how injustice survives?" He asked the crowd. "It survives on silence, not evil, not guns, just silence. People who say, 'That's not my problem, that's not my fight, that's not my fault.'" He looked up. "Well, today we say something different." A pause. "Your silence is your signature, and every signature leaves a trace." Later that evening, Layla opened the door to find a letter left on the front steps. No return address. Inside, a note. "I was his partner. I never stopped him. I just made sure I wasn't the one doing it. I should have spoken up. I'm sorry." Underneath, a name, a badge number, and a direct confession. Layla handed it to her grandfather. Harold read it quietly, then folded it, added it to the case file, and whispered, "One by one." They came down like dominoes. Captain Bellamy, forced resignation. Sergeant Dana Ross, suspended pending investigation. ADA Paul Linwood, disbarment hearing scheduled. A special report on the evening news called it the reckoning. But in Harold's mind, it wasn't reckoning, not yet. It was just the cleanup, because the rot had roots, and it wasn't just Beckett's hands that were dirty. It was the gloves others wore to keep them clean. At the city courthouse, civil litigation hearings were stacked so tightly that courtrooms stayed lit until midnight. Families came forward, survivors gave sworn statements, and behind every testimony was a quiet rage, not just at what happened, But at who knew and said nothing. I sent complaints to Internal Affairs. Nothing. I called the precinct. They told me it was routine. I begged the ADA not to pursue it. He said Beckett's cases never lose. Inside Harold's study, Layla sat with a box of files labeled Beckett Legacy Cases. She'd been helping him organize the documents for the upcoming federal panel hearing, but one thin folder caught her attention. It was marked Sealed, 2011, Officer Involved Death. She hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a summary. Report, a traffic stop, a black teenager, no weapon found, died of cardiac arrest during restraint. Arresting officer D. Beckett. The internal review had cleared him in 48 hours. No charges, no investigation. The body cam had failed to record. Layla's hand covered her mouth. She flipped the page, and there in faint print was a note. Witness later retracted statement. No further action. But at the bottom, someone had handwritten in pencil, "Still doesn't sit right." It wasn't signed. She ran to Harold with the folder in hand. Harold stared at the file for a long time. "I remember this," he said quietly. "They buried this one fast. I asked questions at the time, but the answers were locked away." Layla looked at him. "Can you reopen it?" "I can do more than that," he said. "I can make sure the world knows." At the next panel meeting, Harold read the file aloud. The room was stunned, the date, the name, the pattern, and when he finished, he looked around and asked, "How many more of these are sitting in sealed drawers?" A former DA in the room raised her hand. "I might have seen 2 more. Similar language. No further action." I thought. "It was boilerplate. It was a cover," Harold replied. "Boilerplate silence." Back in prison, Beckett heard about the case on the news. He leaned forward against the tiny TV bolted to the wall. They were bringing up old ghosts now. Ones. He'd convinced himself no one remembered. His cellmate looked over. "Looks like they're digging deeper." Beckett didn't reply. His eyes were locked on the headline. "Old case linked to Beckett, reopened after panel investigation." And beneath it, "Victim's family demands justice. We were lied to." The family of the 2011 victim, 17-year-old Jamal Wright, held a press conference on the courthouse steps. His mother, shoulders trembling, held up a faded photo of Jamal in a graduation cap. "They told us it was his heart. They told us he fought them, that he collapsed." Tears slid down her face. "But I never believed them, and now I know why." The crowd chanted softly behind her, "Say his name. Jamal Wright. Say his name." That night, Harold made a decision. He contacted a federal judge overseeing the state's Public Integrity Commission and submitted a formal request, full audit of sealed cases involving Beckett and any officer under his chain of command. It was bold, aggressive, necessary. At police headquarters, the Chief of Internal Affairs received a list with 37 names. These weren't complaints about Beckett. They were about the people who covered for him. Supervisors who closed cases early, detectives who filed joint reports, IA agents who lost evidence. She called an emergency meeting. "We're no longer reviewing one man, we're reviewing a culture," but not everyone was ready to surrender. A group of current officers met in secret, in garages, diners, empty gyms. Some were furious. "This is a witch hunt. Next thing you know, we can't even write a ticket. They're trying to erase what we do." One younger officer spoke up. "No, they're trying to erase what he did and what we allowed." The room turned quiet. Not everyone was blind anymore. Meanwhile, lawsuits against the city piled up, 38 in 1 week, 2 class action suits. Announced. City Hall's legal department begged for more resources. "We can't survive this storm," one lawyer said. "And the mayor's office is still pretending it's just light rain." But in Harold's eyes, this storm was necessary, cleansing and long overdue. He addressed the press during a major televised conference. "People ask why we're going back. In time, he said. Why, we're dragging up ancient history, but injustice doesn't get old, and silence doesn't expire. He paused. Every sealed file, every ignored complaint is a scar this city wears in the dark. We're just turning on the light. Later that evening, Layla stood in front of the mural of Jamal Wright, recently painted on the side of the community center. She added a flower to the candles lined below it. A woman beside her whispered, "He would have been 29 this year." Layla nodded. He should have been. The courthouse basement smelled of dust, ink, and silence. Harold stood beside two interns as they unlocked a rusted filing cabinet that hadn't been touched since 2014. They wore gloves. The air was stale but heavy, not physically, morally. A single drawer refused to open. One intern pulled harder. The metal shrieked in protest. Inside were dozens of case files with red tape across them, some labeled closed, insufficient. Evidence, others marked only with initials. But what caught Harold's eye were the folders marked in bold, slanted writing. Use of force, internal only. He pulled one, opened it, and paused. Jamal Wright wasn't the only one. There was Marcus Tilley, 22, stopped for a broken taillight. Died in custody. No charges filed. Then Deshaun Price, 15, tackled during a suspicious loitering stop. Suffered head trauma. Died days later. Ruled an accident. Every case listed Beckett as the reporting officer. Everyone was buried. No public inquiry. No press release. Just closed. Harold took a breath. "These aren't ghosts," he whispered. "They're victims." Layla read the files with trembling hands. "How did no one know about this?" Harold shook his head. "They did. They just made sure you didn't." She looked up at him. "So what do we do?" He didn't hesitate. "We bring them back?" At the next review panel session, Harold stood before a new screen. This time, instead of numbers and legal text, there were faces, each one paired with a name, a year, and the phrase, "died during encounter with Beckett." The room went still, not because the truth was new, but because it had been hiding in plain sight. A journalist in the panel gasped, This is serial." Harold nodded. "And we treated it like policy." Meanwhile, back at the prison, Beckett sat in the visitor's chamber handcuffed, staring through the glass at someone unexpected, his old supervisor, Chief Raymond Stokes. Stokes had retired in 2016, had kept his mouth shut through 4 internal investigations, had enjoyed quiet pension checks while the city unraveled. Now he was back, not to apologize, but to threaten. "You're not going to drag me down with you," Stokes said coldly. Beckett leaned in. "You put me on every one of those patrols. You signed every report. You told me the numbers mattered more than noise." Stokes' jaw tightened. "I'll deny it all," Beckett grinned. "They're not asking anymore. They're digging." Layla, meanwhile, had discovered something strange in a file from 2010, a hand-scrawled note clipped to a traffic stop report. It said, "Do not escalate. Individual flagged internally. Third warning." Beckett instructed to proceed cautiously. Layla frowned. Internally flagged. For what? The attached arrest report was unusually short, no charges filed. The name of the arrested person was redacted. She showed Harold. "Who's being flagged?" she asked. Harold scanned it, then froze. This wasn't a warning for Beckett. This was a warning about him. The implication hit like a brick. Someone inside the department had seen Beckett's pattern and tried to stop it. But instead of accountability, they chose secrecy. They flagged his file, quietly, privately, and kept him on the street anyway. Harold immediately called the State Review. "Board, I want a copy of every internal memo about Beckett from 2008 to 2016, he said. "Sealed or not?" The voice on the line hesitated. "That's several hundred pages, Judge." "Then start printing." By week's end, Harold stood in a university auditorium filled with students, activists, and reporters. Behind him was a screen filled with names. Every one of these individuals died under similar circumstances, he said. All encounters involving Beckett, all swept under the rug. He paused. Some were flagged, some were ignored, some never made it to the headlines. But starting today, they all have names again. The audience stood, clapped, chanted, say their names. Meanwhile, the police union launched an aggressive counter-campaign. Advertisements, news appearances, press releases titled, "One bad apple, not the whole orchard. Don't punish good officers, we serve with honor." But public opinion wasn't buying it anymore. One reporter said on air, "If the orchard keeps protecting the apple, it's not the apple we need to worry about." Inside the Department of Justice, Harold met with federal auditors and civil rights attorneys. He placed a thick binder on the table, dozens of sealed cases tied to Beckett and covered up by senior officers. The federal lead flipped through the pages, brow furrowing deeper and deeper. "We've seen corrupt cops before," she said, "but this is structural silence." Harold nodded. "And I'm not asking for your curiosity." He leaned forward. "I'm asking for indictments." At a candlelight vigil that night, families of the forgotten stood in a circle holding photographs. Layla lit a candle for Jamal, then for Marcus, then for Deshawn. Then she paused. "There are more," she said into the mic. "Too many to count. But now we know." The crowd whispered, "We know." Back in Beckett's cell, he sat alone, staring at the wall. He could hear the TV in the hallway. Harold Evans speaking again. They'd shown the list. Beckett leaned back, whispering they weren't supposed to find that drawer. The auditorium was filled wall to wall, not with celebration, with consequence. Reporters lined the aisles, their tripods and flashes blending with the low murmur of anticipation. Family members clutched photos of the dead. Legal clerks flipped through yellow notepads. Students held protest signs, folded neatly across their laps. And at the center, flanked by two marshals, Harold Evans sat like a general before battle. This was no longer a review, it was a reckoning. Layla stood just behind the curtain with a tablet in her hands. "Grandpa," she whispered, tapping his shoulder. "The live stream's already at 1.2 million. Harold didn't react. His eyes were focused straight ahead, on the truth, on justice, on names that had been buried. A bailiff entered. "We're ready, Judge Evans." Harold stood slowly. His steps were measured, deliberate. Every creak of his shoes against the wooden floor seemed to echo like a drumbeat. He approached the podium, placed his folder down, and opened it. Then silence. And then, "We begin with names." He listed them slowly, one by one. Jamal Wright, age 17, died in custody, 2011. Marcus Tilley, age 22, fatal restraint during stop 2009. Deshawn Price, age 15, crushed larynx. Incident sealed. Latonya Barnes, age 31, tased until unconscious, never regained consciousness. On and on. The audience was silent, but not in fear, in fury. Harold looked up. These are not just victims. These are indictments, not just of one man, but of every system that sealed their deaths, shredded their footage, and redacted their names. He paused, "And it ends here." He clicked a remote, and the screen behind him lit up. Internal memo 3807, subject Officer Dwayne Beckett, behavior flagged, private. Below it, a typed note from 2010, displays aggressive conduct patterns, multiple civilian complaints. Recommend reassignment or monitoring. It had been signed by a supervisor, then ignored. "I was told this was career protection," Harold continued, "but protection for whom?" He turned the page. Every recommendation made was buried. Every warning disregarded, every body buried deeper. At the back of the room, Beckett sat in a suit, the first time in months, surrounded by legal counsel and federal agents. He looked older, smaller, like a building collapsing from the inside out when Harold spoke his name directly. Officer Dwayne Beckett. He didn't flinch, but his hands curled into fists, not from anger, from fear. The audience turned as Harold continued. I don't stand here today asking for revenge. That belongs to pain. He paused, looking at the faces in the crowd. I'm here for names, for truth. Because truth, when spoken loudly enough, becomes a weapon. The crowd stirred. But the most dangerous truth is the one we were told to ignore. He clicked again. Use of force exception logs, missing body cam evidence. Officer D. Beckett, 36 incidents. Gasps. A prosecutor sitting near the front row stood up. We are preparing federal conspiracy charges, she announced. Not just for Beckett, for the supervisors, the IA officers, and anyone who covered this up. The crowd erupted. Applause, tears, roar, energy. But Harold raised a hand. The room fell quiet again. We do not celebrate, he looked at Beckett, not because we pity, but because this is not victory, it's surgery. He closed his folder and said just one more thing. The law failed, we all know that. But silence was its co-conspirator, and we just revoked its license. Then he stepped back. Beckett was escorted out the side entrance, head down, camera flashes blinding him as reporters screamed questions. Do you feel remorse? Did you plant drugs on all of them? Will you testify against the others? He said nothing. Only one camera caught the tears streaking his face. Outside, Layla stepped up to the mic. Young, composed, fierce. I watched my grandfather be disrespected, dismissed, and nearly destroyed by this system, she said. But he chose. Truth over anger, names over noise. She held up a photo of Jamal Wright. His name is not a footnote. His name is the beginning of this. That night, Harold walked alone through the city park. Old trees, warm breeze, calm before another storm. He sat on a bench, pulled out a notebook, and wrote, Truth is slow, but it does not stop, and sometimes even a whisper can carry a verdict. The city began to change. Slowly, one precinct announced a public complaint tracking system. Another announced independent oversight panels. A third began training reforms, citing the Evans hearings as the catalyst, but in a dark room across town, a group of retired officers gathered in a smoky bar. Beckett was a scapegoat, one muttered. Another said, Evans won the media. That's all. They didn't see the teenager sitting 2 tables away recording every word. That video would go viral by morning. Back home, Harold placed the last file in the archive. He locked the drawer. Layla looked at him. Is it over? He smiled softly. No, but it's begun. The courtroom looked more like a battleground than a hall of justice. Rows of suits, cameras on booms, reporters lining the gallery like hawks with microphones. Every inch of wood and marble radiated tension, not because of who sat on trial, but because of what they represented, the state versus those who knew. 7 defendants, 4 in law enforcement, 2 prosecutors, 1 retired IA director, all charged with conspiracy to obstruct justice, destruction of public records, and enabling civil rights violations. And sitting quietly in the second row, Harold Evans. Not as a judge, not as a witness, as a sentinel, watching, listening, waiting. The first to testify was Officer Daniel Mendez. He wore his badge, but left his pride outside. I was new. I followed orders. I saw things I should have reported. I didn't. That's on me. He pointed across the room at former Sergeant Dana Ross. She told me to look the other way. She said, Beckett gets things done. Don't make noise. Ross sat stiff, eyes glassy. Next came a public defender who had handled over a dozen Beckett cases. Every time I challenged the arrest, I was told the evidence was clean. But now we know the reports were copy-pasted. Same language, same tactics. But it wasn't until the 3rd day that the courtroom caught fire. Chief Raymond Stokes took the stand. He had been subpoenaed after Beckett named him during his plea review. The courtroom held its breath as he took his seat. The prosecutor stepped forward. Chief Stokes, did you ever receive formal complaints about Officer Beckett's conduct? Stokes cleared his throat. Yes. And what did you do with them? He hesitated. Filed them, flagged his profile, raised concerns. And? Silence. Nothing changed, he said finally, because the department needed results, and Beckett gave them results. And how many of those results were real? Stokes looked down. I don't know anymore. Outside, the courthouse lawn was covered in people. Some held candles, some held signs. We told you. Silence is a crime. Truth stands, even when cops fall. Layla stood near the edge, live streaming for the Justice Network's youth panel. We're not just watching a trial, she said into the mic. We're watching a blueprint burn. Back inside, the real moment of reckoning came with Beckett's appearance. He entered in shackles, slimmer, paler, no swagger. He was placed at the center of the courtroom, not to be judged, but to speak. The federal prosecutor asked, Mr. Beckett, did you knowingly falsify reports? Yes. Did you plant evidence? Yes. Did you act alone? Beckett paused. No. Who else was involved? He looked up and began to name names, one by one. Some were already on trial, others weren't. Yet. But then came something unexpected. The prosecutor asked, Is there any case in particular you regret the most? Beckett swallowed. Yes. Which one? Marcus Tilley. I pushed him harder than I should have. He hit the pavement. I heard something crack. And what did you do? I said he resisted. Wrote it in the report. My body cam was off. It wasn't supposed to be. He paused, eyes misting. He was the first one that died. The room stilled. Even the judge leaned forward. Harold did not move, but Layla, watching from her phone outside, whispered under her breath. He finally said it. As the trial reached its midpoint, Harold was invited to speak as an impact voice. He stepped onto the stand. No theatrics, just presence. I've spent my life around the law, he said. I believed in its structure, even when I didn't always trust its stewards. He looked directly at the jury, but the law is only as honest as the hands that hold it. And we watched hands grow greedy, afraid, and corrupt. He pointed toward the table of defendants. They didn't just fail justice, they protected its failure, wrapped it in silence, and that makes them architects of harm. Outside the courtroom, news anchors called it a once-in-a-generation reckoning. Cable networks ran headlines like, Culture of Cover-Up, Trial Exposes Decades of Misconduct. Truth versus Tradition, the Harold Evans Effect. But in Harold's mind, something still lingered, something unfinished. He returned home one evening and opened a letter sitting on his doorstep. No name, no stamp, just handwritten in black ink. There's one more file, one more name, and it's not just Beckett's. Attached was a copy of a report, one he hadn't seen. It wasn't about brutality, it was about policy. A memo that altered complaint tracking in 2009, reclassified excessive force under resistance protocols, signed off by a former city attorney, still in office, still active, still untouched. Harold's eyes narrowed. They didn't just protect Beckett, he whispered. They designed him. He stood up, pulled out his phone, and made a call to the Federal Commission chair. There's a memo you need to see, he said, because the system isn't just on trial, the architects are next. It was the quiet that struck first. No cameras flashing, no reporters yelling, just the thick, suspended silence of a courtroom seconds before it erupts. The jury had returned. 12 people, everyday citizens who had listened, watched, endured, who had heard the names, seen the files, felt the weight of truth press down like gravity. The judge took her seat. Has the jury reached a unanimous verdict? The foreman stood. We have. Count 1, conspiracy to obstruct justice, guilty. Count 2, destruction of public records, guilty. Count 3, enabling civil rights violations, guilty over and over. 7 defendants, 7 collapses. 1. System cracked wide open, gasps, cries, applause stifled by decorum but not by emotion. In the gallery, mothers wept. In the back row, Layla squeezed Harold's hand. Outside, 1,000 protesters exploded into chants. Guilty. The system knew. Say their names. Harold didn't cheer. He stood quietly, stoic, because justice doesn't roar, it lands. Later that day, Harold stood on the courthouse steps, cameras pointed like rifles, mics raised like flags. He didn't read from notes. He spoke from a lifetime. "You've seen the verdicts," he said, "but let me tell you what you didn't see. You didn't see the mothers crying alone in hallways, the children asking why Daddy never came back, the students denied futures over false arrests. You didn't see the files that disappeared, the footage erased, the promotions given for staying silent." He paused. "And now you never will, because we saw it for you." He continued, voice calm but unrelenting. "This fire wasn't started by protesters, or by a judge, or even by a cop. We built this fire, all of us, by letting it burn in the background, by walking past it and pretending the smoke wasn't real." He looked across the sea of cameras. "But today we didn't put it out. We passed the torch, to the courts, to the youth, to every silence that's now a scream." Layla, watching nearby, felt her chest rise with something she hadn't known she was holding. Relief, but also something more, responsibility. That evening, a new law passed its final vote. The Evans Accountability Act. It mandated public tracking of officer misconduct, independent prosecutors for police cases, federal review of any unexplained in-custody deaths, permanent archiving of all body cam footage. With third-party access, the city voted to rename the courthouse plaza Evans Justice Square. But the story didn't end there, because Harold didn't stop. He requested one last hearing, behind closed doors. A quiet room, no audience, only a judge, a federal attorney, and the city's chief legal counsel, the one who signed that 2009 memo reclassifying force as resistance. Harold laid the document in front of them. "Your pen let it happen," he said. "You never planted evidence, but you built the paperwork that let it bloom." The man didn't deny it. He resigned the next morning. Meanwhile, Beckett was sentenced to 42 years without parole. He didn't cry. He just stared at the floor as the judge said, "You were not a rogue actor. You were a symptom." In classrooms across the country, the case was added to textbooks: the Beckett scandal, the Evans trials, the Truth Revolution. At the mural of Jamal Wright, Layla placed a fresh candle. This time, she wasn't alone. Dozens joined her, each with a candle, each with a name. And Harold, he retired quietly. No banners, just a final letter he left on his desk. It read, "The system is not broken. It's working exactly as it was built. So don't fix it. Rebuild it. From the ground up. And never forget, truth isn't a tool, it's a torch." A year later, Layla stood at a podium in a packed auditorium. She was now a civil rights law student. She looked out at a crowd of peers. "I don't want to become my grandfather," she said with a smile. "But I do want to become the kind of threat to injustice that he was." Cheers erupted. Truth had changed hands, not ended, just passed on.